Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. All right, well, it's a beautiful day here in Barrel yet again. Technically, it's still summer here, but the weather doesn't realise that. So the weather is like heading into autumn. The leaves are starting to turn and we've had a couple of very cold nights, but it's just beautiful and warm in the day and blue and sunny. So I've been getting about a kilo of tomatoes a day, cherry tomatoes in my garden, and starting to pick apples. I'm going to make some apple cobbler probably later on. So yeah, it's a very nice. I'm very much enjoying being at home and not being on tour for a change. It's very relaxing being at home and actually spending time with my family. Anyway, enough of that. What do you need to know that's coming up? So the book launch is coming up on the 8th. I'm going to, because I'm old, I haven't done much live streaming. I know it's what young people do. So I'm going to probably practice on the weekend, do a live stream on the weekend. But I'll get it all sorted out and do the big book launch live streamed. And Booktopia, I've made an arrangement with them so that I can go in and sign a huge stack of books. Because the problem is if I have a book launch online, then how do you get signed books, which is what you may well want. That's what people come and get at book launches. So I thought, how am I going to get signed books to people, because I can't handle doing all the posting and everything myself. So I contacted Booktopia, and I'm going to go down to their offices in Sydney and just sign a huge stack of books. So if you want a signed book and you live in Australia or New Zealand, because that's the only places they ship to, they can ship you a signed book from me. And, they know what they're doing. They ship books all day, every day. So they can handle it all. And I'll have a link in the show notes. So that's pretty cool. If you want to get on that, you can actually go to Booktopia and pre-order it to make sure you get a signed copy. I'll put the link in the show notes for this episode. What else? If you're overseas, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do for overseas people who would like a signed copy. It might be that I have to just send you a book plate, because I know if they ship books overseas, it costs a fortune. It costs a lot of money. Because just for example, say you live in America. In America, a paperback book costs like $7 or $8. One of my paperback books, American. Whereas in Australia, one of my books costs about $17, which works out about $12 American. So it costs more basically. And then if you pay $30 to ship it to America, you're looking at like $45 for a book. And it's like, as lovely as my signature is, it's that's a lot to pay for it. So whereas if you send a letter, that's like $4 or $5. So I might work something out where you can go to my Coffee page and pay $5 Australian, so like $3.50, $4 American, and I'll send, or whatever your currency is. I guess that $5 Australian would be like €3 or €4, or pounds it'd be 2.5. And then I can send to anyone overseas. I can just send them a book plate. So that's what I'm planning. This is how I spend my time cooking up these cunning plans. Anyway, that's not why you're here. You're here for a story. And we're going to do another Korean one this week. I've got a few options. People are sending me all these great suggestions. I want to push on with Odysseus, because the next story in the tale of the Odyssey is a real cracker. But I'm not going to do it this week. This week I'm going to do another Korean story from my sister-in-law's Korean folktale book. This is apparently it's very, very well known in Korea. So if you're a Korean listener, you may know it already. But I'm going to change it because I'm going to do Nanny Piggins' version. All right, so let's just get into it. This is the story of Huengbu and Nolbu, as told by Nanny Piggins. Our story today is from the olden Korean story days, said Nanny Piggins. How do you know so many Korean stories from the olden days? Asked Michael. Did you learn them from the Flying Lee brothers when you worked at the circus? Asked Samantha. The Flying Lee brothers were trapeze artists who Nanny Piggins worked with when she was the world's most glamorous flying pig. They were lovely, kind men who taught her much about how to land face first on the ground and pretend it didn't hurt, even though you were pretty sure you'd broken every rib in your body. No, June and Jin taught me much, said Nanny Piggins. How to bandage a head injury, how to make dasik tea cookies, how to cheat at gongji. But I already knew the story of Huengbu and Nolbu because they just happened to be distant relatives of mine. What? Said Derek. Are you saying, began Michael. I am saying that their full names were, in fact, Huengbu and Nolbu Piggins. So they were pigs, said Michael. Oh, yes, said Nanny Piggins. And women? Asked Samantha. Oh, no, said Nanny Piggins. No, Huengbu and Nolbu were brothers. Oh, said Derek. So more like Bramwell? Not really, said Nanny Piggins. Nolbu actually took after Boris. The children turned and looked at Boris. Now, regular listeners will be aware that Boris was a 10-foot-tall ballet dancing bear from Russia, whereas Nanny Piggins and all the rest of her family were 4-foot-tall pigs, except for the goat branch of her family, but we won't digress into that. Now, Boris became Nanny Piggins' brother when she adopted him. When it came to science, Nanny Piggins didn't believe in genetics. She was suspicious of anything so tiny she couldn't see, not even with a magnifying glass. So the children knew there was no point trying to argue that Nolbu, a pig living in Korea hundreds of years ago, had probably not inherited any personality traits from Boris, a bear living in the present day. Right, OK, said Derek supportively. He wanted to hear the story, so he was prepared to set aside logic and common sense. You'd better tell us the whole story, said Michael. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. But now you've made me think of Korean snacks, so I'd better pop into the kitchen and whip up a few dozen dasik tea cookies so we can have something to nibble on while I tell the tale. An hour later, the children were all gathered around Nanny Piggins, each with a plate on their laps piled high with cookies, so they were ready to begin. As I say, Huengbu and Nolbu were both brothers, so of course they hated each other, said Nanny Piggins. Hey, said Michael, Derek and I are brothers and we don't hate each other. True, said Nanny Piggins, but that is because you were raised properly by me, so you have love in your hearts. When did you raise us to have love in our hearts? Asked Derek. When I raised you with cake in your stomachs, said Nanny Piggins. The children could not deny that they loved having cake in their stomachs, and putting it in there had made them love their nanny, so they realised she was right. Huengbu and Nolbu had a rich father, continued Nanny Piggins. Well, that's nice, said Boris. But one day the father died, said Nanny Piggins. Oh, that's terrible, said Boris. Of great old age, said Nanny Piggins, while eating a really nice slice of cake, so it was not too sad. Phew, said Boris. The father had written it down in his will that when he died, all his money, his successful business, and his beautiful house should be split equally between his 2 sons. But wicked Nolbu cheated Huengbu out of his half. How did he do that? Asked Derek. Well, the story doesn't say, said Nanny Piggins. Oh, perhaps he cheated at Monopoly, suggested Michael. Probably, said Nanny Piggins. Monopoly is a dreadful game. Someone always ends up crying on the floor under the table. It's usually me, said Boris. I don't know why any parent would ever buy such a horrible board game. They could save time and money by picking up a stick and poking one of their children in the face. It would have the same result as playing Monopoly and save everyone an insufferably torturous 4 hours of being forced to understand how economics works. Anyway, Nolbu was a terrible rotter, so I'm sure he would cheat at Monopoly, said Nanny Piggins. That's what my sisters always did. They would wait until I went to the toilet or to the kitchen for a little snack. Then they would steal all the money out of the bank. I'd return to the game and find that the bank till was suspiciously full of lolly wrappers and shopping receipts where the banknotes had been. So let's imagine that's what did happen. Huengbu and Nolbu played Monopoly, and Nolbu cheated so much, and Huengbu lost by so much. By the end of the game, he hadn't just lost all the imaginary property on the board, he'd also lost his entire half of his real inheritance. So he had to move his wife and children out of the beautiful family house and go and live in a shack in the village with all the other poor peasants. Oh, that's terrible, said Samantha. Yes, but Huengbu didn't mind because, like Boris, he was sweet-spirited and optimistic. And good at ballet? Asked Boris. Probably, said Nanny Piggins, but sadly, you can't eat ballet. So Huengbu had to grow rice, which was fine. His wife and children loved rice, particularly when they made it into rice pudding, especially chocolate rice pudding. Did they have chocolate in the olden Korean story days? Asked Derek. My relatives did, said Nanny Piggins. There have been a lot of fabulously glamorous, brilliant and athletic women in my family tree, so of course they had access to South American trade routes. Anyway, Huengbu and his family were happy with their little peasant farm, until one year when there was a bad crop, said Nanny Piggins. The rice was naughty? Asked Boris. No, the rice was delicious, said Nanny Piggins. So a swarm of caterpillars ate it, and they ran out of food. Now, in the olden Korean story days, there were no supermarkets, no Uber Eats, and no fast food restaurants. If the food in your fields didn't grow, that was it. You had no food, which made it very difficult to be a parent. Children complain enough when they are fed. Imagine how much they complain when they're not fed. The answer is a lot. Huengbu didn't want his family to starve, so he went to visit his rich brother and beg for help. He walked all the way to his brother's beautiful house and knocked on the door. Nolbu just happened to be in the middle of cooking dinner, and it is an inconvenience to be interrupted when you're making a culinary masterpiece, so he was very grumpy when he opened the door and saw his brother standing there. Ugh! What do you want? Snapped Nolbu. Oh, brother, said Huengbu, a swarm of caterpillars ate my rice crop. I have no food to feed my family. I am begging you to help me so that my wife and children do not starve. Nolbu, like all angry people, got even angrier about small things than he did about big things. So his brother appealing for charity enraged him. I'm not helping you, you useless loafer, said Nolbu. Get away from my house. Now Nolbu still had his rice ladle in his hand from cooking dinner, so he slapped Huengbu across the face with his rice paddle. Ow, said Huengbu. He reached up to check if his face was still there, and he felt amongst his beard rice. The rice paddle had left rice stuck to the side of his face. Huengbu hurriedly scraped it off and put it in his pocket. Brother, would you mind slapping me again? Asked Huengbu. I'll slap you from here to Tuesday, said Nolbu. And he did. He slapped Huengbu with the paddle across the other cheek. Huengbu reached up and felt more rice. Thank you, kind brother, said Huengbu, as he hurried away, scraping the rice from both sides of his face, happy that he would have some food to share with his family. But on the way home, Huengbu heard a commotion. There was a baby bird flapping and squawking in terror. A snake was raised ready to strike at it. So Huengbu rushed forward, regardless of his own safety, and shooed the snake away. But then he realized the bird was injured. It had a broken leg. Oh, this is so sad, said Boris. Hang in there, Boris. It will get better eventually. You poor baby bird, said Huengbu. He carefully bandaged the bird's leg. Then he carried the bird home, where it would be safe while it healed. And Huengbu's children were very happy to find insects to eat. After all, they did have a lot of caterpillars in their rice paddocks, so it wasn't hard. So they looked after and fed the poor injured bird. When the bird regained its strength, it flew south with all the other birds migrating for the winter, and Huengbu's family was sorry to see it go. But the following spring, the bird returned, and it brought Huengbu a gift. Was it a jar of honey? Asked Boris. Was it a remote-control car? Asked Michael. No, the bird gave Huengbu a single pumpkin seed, said Nanny Piggins. A vegetable seed? Asked Derek. I know, it sounds bad, doesn't it, said Nanny Piggins, but hang in there. Oh, how lovely, said Huengbu. What a thoughtful gift. I'll just plant it, shall I? Which is what he did. He shoved the pumpkin seed in the ground and thought no more of it. But when Huengbu went outside the next day, it had already grown into a full-sized pumpkin vine, and there were 3 great big fat pumpkins. Oh, marvellous! We won't have to starve today, children, said Huengbu. We've got pumpkin for dinner. Now, pumpkin may not have been the children's favourite food, but it was a lot nicer than starving, so they were happy at the good news. Oh, goody, said the children. Huengbu picked up the first pumpkin and cut it in half, and when he did, a rush of treasure fell out. What kind of treasure? Asked Michael. Was it diamonds or gold? Oh, no, much better than that, said Nanny Piggins. Out came the finest treasure of all. The first pumpkin contained chocolate. The second pumpkin contained cake, and the third pumpkin, it was full of chocolate chip cookies. And they were all delicious. Huengbu's family feasted that night. The next day, Huengbu invited all the peasants in the village to come to his house for a party so he could share his good fortune. So they all lived happily ever after? Asked Samantha. Well, they would have done, said Nanny Piggins, except Nolbu found out. He was enraged to hear that his brother was throwing parties and sharing chocolate with his neighbours. Nolbu stormed down to his brother's house to find out what was going on. Now, Huengbu was not the type to try and keep secrets, so he told Nolbu the whole story. Well, there was a bird with a broken leg. I helped the bird, and when the bird was better, it flew off, and it came back the next spring with a magic seed, which grew the wonderful chocolate-filled pumpkins. Is that all you have to do? Asked Nolbu. Fine, any idiot can do that. So Nolbu replicated exactly what his brother did, step by step. Except he couldn't find a baby bird with a broken leg, so instead he found a healthy baby bird and broke its leg himself. What? Said Derek. Well, baby birds with broken legs don't just grow on trees, said Nanny Piggins. He couldn't find one, so he made one. Nolbu thought he was being very clever. When the bird healed, Nolbu set it free. There you go, I healed you. Now you can go and get me a magical pumpkin seed, said Nolbu. I know that's what you birds do when you have a broken leg. So the bird flew away, and the next spring it did return with a seed. Nolbu was delighted. He kicked at the bird to shoo it away and hurriedly planted the pumpkin seed in the ground. And the following morning, a great big pumpkin vine had grown with 3 huge pumpkins. So it did work, said Michael. Well, that's how it appeared, said Nanny Piggins. Woohoo! It worked, said Nolbu. He rushed out into his garden, picked a pumpkin, and hacked it open. And inside it was full of pumpkin. Ugh, said Boris. How awful. I mean, it's one thing to eat pumpkin, but to get pumpkin when you're expecting chocolate, that must have been heartbreaking. Well, that's what Nolbu thought too, said Nanny Piggins. So he quickly opened the second pumpkin, and inside that one he found more pumpkin. He wasn't so wicked, I'd almost feel sorry for him, said Boris. Nolbu was enraged, so he hurried to cut open the third pumpkin. And inside was more pumpkin, asked Michael. No, a pumpkin goblin who leapt out brandishing a pumpkin-covered ladle and chased Nolbu about the yard, whacking him with it until he was black and blue and covered in pumpkin. The end. Time for bed. Wow, that's an intense story, said Derek. Yes, and it teaches you an important life lesson, said Nanny Piggins. It does, asked Samantha. To not eat pumpkin? Asked Derek. Well, it is wise to be wary of extremely large vegetables, said Nanny Piggins, but there is a more important lesson. Be careful when following instructions. Anyone with an ounce of common sense would know it is wrong to purposely break a bird's leg. Instructions are like recipes. If you read a recipe and it says, pour in 4 litres of arsenic, you wouldn't do that, would you? No, said the children, and that is the moral to the story. No matter how much you want a magical chocolate-filled pumpkin, you should always remember to use common sense. The end. Time for bed. Okay, well, that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Not sure what I'm doing next week. It could be Odysseus, and the next one's all about this floating brass island and the winds being stolen inside a bag. So that's a pretty good story, but then I've got some other ideas too. So anyway, we'll see what happens. Oh, I know what I was thinking of doing, because I'm writing my book about Romeo and Juliet at the moment, and that's based on the Shakespeare play. But as research, I read the folk story that it was based on, which was an Italian folk story. And that Italian folk story would have been inspired by the story from ancient Greece about Pyramus and Thisbe. You're talking through a crack in the wall. If you've ever seen Midsummer Night's Dream, they refer to it in that. So anyway, I just see, I love this stuff about how stories sort of like swirl around and around through time and just get reinvented. So I thought maybe one week I'll do the story of Pyramus and Thisbe on the podcast. That'll be a bit of fun. All right. Well, that's it for now. I think I've updated you on everything. So until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.